2 million men, thousands of ships, and the future of the free world are waiting for an order that could send them to glory, or to a total disaster on the beaches of Normandy. In this moment, history does not depend on a great speech, but on a technical decision that no one dares to utter aloud. Many believe they know what D-Day means. The textbooks say it was the beginning of the end, but most ignore the logistical secret hidden behind that letter. Was it a deception code? Or the confession of a plan that was already failing? Today, we reconstruct the exact moment time stood still. The question has persisted for decades in the minds of millions: what did the D in D-Day actually stand for? While theorists suggest words like deliverance or decision, the military reality was much colder, more precise, and, for many, quite unexpected. In military terms, the D simply stood for day. It was a mathematical placeholder used to plan operations when the exact calendar date was still unknown or highly classified. If the invasion was delayed by weather, as it was in June 1944, every logistical order, from the timing of the paratroopers to the naval bombardment, remained synced to D-Day minus or plus a certain number of hours. But for the men in Southwick House, this letter represented a logistical nightmare. Imagine coordinating the movement of 7,000 vessels and 11,000 aircraft under a shroud of total secrecy. This was not a routine morning, it was the largest synchronized movement of human force in history. While the world waited for a sign, the generals were obsessed with each hour, the exact second the first boot would touch the sand. The D wasn't a symbol of hope, it was the heartbeat of a machine that could no longer be stopped. By 3 in the morning, the D in D-Day had become a physical weight. For the tens of thousands of young men tossed by the grey swells of the English Channel, the body was no longer a vessel of strength, but a source of betrayal. Inside the steel walls of the Higgins boats, the air was thick with the smell of diesel, salt spray, and the sour scent of mass seasickness. This was the raw reality of the invasion. Men were packed so tightly they could barely move, each carrying nearly 80 pounds of gear, rifles, ammunition, gas masks, and rations, all soaked through by the freezing spray of the Atlantic. At a speed of only 9 knots, the journey was an endurance test of the human spirit. The soldiers' skin was pale, their hands numbed by the cold, and their stomachs knotted by a fear that no training manual could prepare them for. Every muscle was strained, every nerve ending on fire as they waited for the ramp to drop. They weren't just fighting a war against an invisible enemy on the horizon, they were fighting their own bodies, fighting the exhaustion, the cold, and the paralyzing weight of gear that threatened to pull them straight to the bottom of the sea the moment they stepped into the surf. On this morning, survival was a matter of raw, agonizing persistence. As the ramps finally dropped, the soldiers didn't just step into a battlefield, they stepped into a world that roared. This was Omaha Beach, a stretch of sand that had been transformed into a symphony of industrial-scale destruction. Imagine a sensory overload so intense it defies description. The air was no longer composed of oxygen, but of a thick, choking mixture of cordite, diesel fumes, and the metallic tang of blood. The sound was not a series of explosions, but a continuous, vibrating wall of noise, the rhythmic thumping of MG-42 machine guns and the bone-shaking whistle of heavy artillery shells passing overhead. The environment itself was an obstacle course of waste and iron. The tide was coming in, pushing a slurry of debris, shattered wood, and abandoned equipment against the shore. These were the invisible trades of war, the engineers trying to blow up steel hedgehogs under fire, and the medics working in the rising surf, surrounded by the mechanical wreckage of a plan that was breaking apart in real time. Visibility was a luxury. A dense fog of black smoke from burning tanks hung over the bluffs, obscuring the German positions and turning the morning sun into a pale, sickly disk. To survive here was to navigate a landscape where every inch of ground was contested, and every breath was a struggle against the overwhelming stench of decay and gunpowder. This wasn't just a beach anymore, it was a living, breathing machine of chaos that demanded everything from those trapped within it. But D-Day was not just a battle of raw courage, it was a triumph of radical, almost desperate, military ingenuity. To breach the Atlantic Wall, the Allies couldn't rely on standard tactics. They had to reinvent the very tools of war. This was the chapter of the Hobart's Funnies, strange, specialized tanks designed to overcome the impossible. There were tanks that carried giant bobbins of canvas to create roads over soft sand, and others equipped with massive rotating chains to detonating mines safely ahead of the infantry. This wasn't just machinery, it was the physical manifestation of a desperate need to survive an environment that was designed to kill. Even more profound was the Operation Fortitude, a masterpiece of deception. While the Relentless was being carved into the sands of Normandy, an entire ghost army of inflatable tanks and wooden planes was stationed across from Calais. The Allied command used the Germans' own obsession with logic against them, creating a phantom threat that kept Hitler's most powerful divisions idle while the real invasion unfolded miles away. In the history of command, this ingenuity was the silent shield that allowed the soldiers on the beaches a narrow, blood-stained window of opportunity. The victory at Normandy came with a biological and human tax that was almost impossible to calculate. As the smoke cleared, the reality of the aftermath set in. For many, the struggle didn't end when they reached the bluffs. It was only the beginning of a long battle against infection, exhaustion, and the deep, invisible scars of combat. In this era, even with the recent miracle of penicillin, the environment of the hedgerows was a breeding ground for disease. Soldiers lived for weeks in damp trenches, their immune systems strained by constant stress and lack of sleep. This was a world of trench foot and festering wounds, where the lack of basic hygiene was not a choice, but a brutal condition of survival. But there was also a strategic consequence to this biological toll. The high casualty rates meant that the Allied command had to constantly adapt, replacing seasoned veterans with fresh, untested troops who had to develop their own immunity to the horrors of war overnight. When we look at the numbers, thousands of young men who never returned to their homes in the United States or Britain, we see more than just a list of casualties. We see the record of human resilience under a pressure that most of us can barely imagine. The D in D-Day ultimately stood for the day we accepted a price that changed the course of our biological and political history forever. When we look back at the world of 1944, it is easy to focus only on the grand scale of the maps and the numbers of the divisions. We see the absence of certainty and the overwhelming presence of risk. But what defines the D in D-Day is not just a technical placeholder or a military secret. It is the record of human resilience under a pressure that shouldn't have been survivable. These men lived inside a moment shaped by constraints they could not escape, yet they moved forward anyway. The success of the invasion was not a rare achievement of luck, it was a testament to a generation that learned how to build a future out of raw endurance and calculated sacrifice. History is not just a list of dates, it is the lived experience of those who negotiated with their own fear to ensure our freedom. Thank you for exploring this reconstructed past with us. If you want to continue discovering history through the lives that changed the world, one decision at a time, subscribe to our channel. The command room is waiting. See you in the next chapter.